それでは、サイバーリスク管理、英国の法規制に求められる拠点リーダーシップと題しまして、ジェイミー・サンダー氏に講演いただきます。それでは、ジェイミー氏、よろしくお願いいたします。
My name is Dr. Jamie Saunders, as Tomomi has said. I'm a senior executive advisor at Nihon Cyber Defense. I spent 29 years with the UK government before retiring in 2017. And I've spent the past 3 years advising C-suites and company boards on governing cyber risk. As well as my role at Nihon Cyber Defense, I'm a visiting professor at University College London and a visiting fellow at the University of Oxford. Today I will discuss 3 topics: governing cyber risk, particularly the role of the C-suite and the board. I will talk about UK regulatory requirements, and I will talk about the implications for UK subsidiaries and branches of Japanese companies. So I will start by talking about the role of the C-suite and the board. Now, it's very obvious that the C-suite and the board have a very different role to the one of the specialist staff in the IT and security departments. The problem is that a lot of the guidance available to companies on cyber is aimed at these specialist staff, and there's very little guidance there to help company boards understand their roles. And the result of that is that a lot of the board level conversations about cyber risk end up focusing on technical and operational detail rather than being broader conversations about risk exposure, resilience, risk tolerance, crisis management, and strategic decision making, which are proper topics for the board. The diagram I'm showing you here is an illustration of the hierarchy of risk management within a company, starting with IT operations and security operations and going up to the board governance level. And what this shows is that although there is guidance available for IT operators and security operators, there's very little guidance available at the board level. I just wanted to show some of the more technical and operational guidance that exists for cybersecurity, and many of you will be familiar with these. They're all very important, and every company should be taking these seriously, but they do not provide a holistic view of risk exposure, nor the full range of mitigations available to companies to reduce the likelihood and impact of risks. The second point is that very few companies in practice can say that they meet these technical and operational standards perfectly. People will always make mistakes, and the technical and threat environment is constantly changing. What matters is that a company understands what its principal risk exposures are and where they should be focusing their controls and assurance measures. This will always be context specific because every company have their own risks, their own priorities, and their own operating environment. Here are some examples of the guidance that is available for company boards on governing cyber risk. None of these are perfect, but personally I have found the City UK report the most useful, Governing Cyber Risk, a guide for company boards. That may be because I wrote it. I'm going to explain some of the key principles in the City UK report shortly, but first I want to talk about regulatory requirements in the UK and how they affect you as branches of Japanese companies. What I have on the screen here is a detailed extract from an FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, guidance on governing cyber risk within the financial sector. Now, different sectors in the UK have different ways of overseeing cyber risk governance, and it's very important that you're familiar with the specific requirements relevant to your sector. I've chosen to talk about the Financial Conduct Authority guidance because it's one of the most mature, but also because many of your companies will be FCA regulated. As I say, the text on this screen is an extract from the self-assessment questionnaire that the FCA have published. This represents about 1/5, 20% of the FCA questionnaire, and most of the questions are operational in nature. They're based on the NIST guidance, which I showed you up on the screen earlier on. But critically, the FCA also includes a list of governance questions that are aimed clearly at the company board and C-suite, and not at the specialist IT and security staff. And these are the questions that I'm listing here. I'm not going to talk about all these questions, but I did want to mention 2 items on the list just to give you an idea about the nature of the FCA's interest. And the first one is the first to the cybersecurity strategy and cybersecurity framework. As I said earlier, no organisation can be expected to meet all the demands of the NIST framework across all of its operations. In practice, prioritisation decisions have to be made, and these have to be based on a proper understanding of your business objectives and the context within which you're operating. And these priorities need to be clearly communicated to the whole of the business, because a lot of cyber risk is carried outside of the IT department. Now, only the senior leadership of a company can have the breadth of insight and authority to understand those risks and to communicate them effectively to the whole of the workforce. The second question I wanted to mention was the strategic exercising programme. This is very important. If you look back at some of the major cyber incidents of recent years, you will see the important role that company leadership have played in crisis management and the problems that occur when they get things wrong. The reason that the regulator wants to see that an exercise programme is in place is because he wants assurance that the board understand their role in the event of a major incident and that they are equipped to fulfil that role. I now want to talk about the implications for UK subsidiaries and branches of Japanese companies. And I'm going to start with an example. Now, most of you will be familiar with the event that occurred with Equifax in the United States in 2017. There's been a huge amount of press about this, and Equifax is still facing multi-million-dollar fines and many lawsuits in America and elsewhere in the world. The Equifax Incorporated story is worth studying on its own, but I want to focus today on Equifax Limited, which was the UK branch of Equifax. Equifax Limited, the UK branch, was fined £500,000 because the regulator, in this case the Information Commissioner's Office, judged that the UK leadership team had failed to get proper assurance that the data of UK citizens was properly protected. The fact that the IT systems holding this data were in the US was not deemed relevant by the ICO. The UK board has responsibility for safeguarding UK citizens' data, and they were judged to have failed. And it's worth noting that the £500,000 fine was the maximum fine available at the time. Now that GDPR is in place, that fine could have been very much bigger. On the screen, you've got some quotations from the ICO's findings, and the entire finding can be found online. I hope the implications for you as leaders of UK branches and subsidiaries are clear. You are responsible for ensuring that cyber risks associated with your UK operations are properly managed, irrespective of whether your IT is hosted here in the UK or in Japan. So let's take a closer look at your responsibilities as senior leaders of branches and subsidiaries operating in the UK. And I said I would talk a little bit more about the City UK report governing cyber risk, a guide for company boards. That report sets out a number of questions that boards should be asking in order to determine the adequacy of their cyber risk governance. What I've done on the screen is to adapt the questions from the report to the circumstances of a UK subsidiary of an overseas headquartered company. I should add I've done the same for the FCA questions that I showed you earlier, but we don't have time to go through that today. When I wrote the City UK report, I interviewed a number of board chairmen, the chairs of risk and audit committees, and other non-executive directors to establish how well these questions could be answered. And that did include subsidiaries of Japanese companies operating in the UK. And if you look through all these questions, you as a senior leader or as a board member of a Japanese subsidiary ought to be able to answer these questions clearly. And this should form the basis of your conversations with your specialist staff, be they in the UK or Japan. So I want to pick out 3 examples just to illustrate these questions. The first is about financial resilience. Now, we all know that a serious cyber incident can be expensive. Is it clear who pays for the remediation costs? Have contingency provisions been made for this in local budgets, or would you expect to draw funds down from the headquarters budget? And are you insured? These are all questions that are enormously important when a crisis hits, and it's as well to answer these questions in advance. The second point I wanted to raise was about executive accountability. Who is responsible for overseeing cyber risk management in your subsidiary? Are they based in the UK or are they based in Japan? If they are based in Japan, do they have a proper understanding of your UK business priorities? And if they're based in the UK, are they able to influence how risks are being mitigated on systems, IT systems, based in Japan? And how do you know that these controls take proper account of systems and data that may be unique to you in the UK or just particularly important to you in the UK, but may not be that important to the teams in Japan, or the teams in Japan may not even be aware of them? And then the final question I wanted to highlight was about board ownership and your personal regulatory and fiduciary responsibilities. In the UK, we have something called the senior management regime, and it places personal responsibility on board members to fulfill these responsibilities. So it's very important that you understand what they are. Now, I use all of these questions a lot in my consulting work, and I found that boards need quite a lot of help to answer them. But once they've started on this journey, it does help shift the conversation at board level from detailed consideration of technical controls to a more strategic conversation about risk and resilience. And it improves the quality of the conversation between senior executives and board members and the executive staff, the technology and operational staff who are responsible for managing the risk on a day-to-day basis. I will close with just emphasizing these key points from my presentation. The first is that management committees and boards of UK subsidiaries are accountable for overseeing cyber risk management within their jurisdictions within the UK. The second is that the regulatory requirements in the UK apply irrespective of overseas ownership. Next, the UK management committees and boards have a key role in establishing the specific circumstances of the UK company's operating environment. These will be country specific. There will be country specific differences in regulation, in the market, and the cyber risk profile. Next, it's critical that you understand your personal responsibilities as board members or C-suite and how they relate to the responsibilities of HQ executives in Japan. And finally, cyber is not an issue for the IT and security departments to manage on their own. You have a critical role to play. Tomomi, that completes my remarks, and I would welcome questions from our audience.
私の方から一つ質問したいと思います。先ほど、ジェイミーの講演の中では、FCA、金融の規制、庁ですね、の、例を出して、どういったガバナンスに関する質問が投げかけられているかという話がありました。しかし、一方で、業界によってはあまり規制がないというような業界があると思います。こういった規制によって強化されていくようなセキュリティというような形でリアクティブに反応ができないような業界についてはどのようにインセンティブを確保していくのかというところを聞きたいと思います。
So the first thing to say, Tomomi, is that a lot of other sectors do have strong cyber security regulation, particularly critical national infrastructure sectors, so energy and transport, other utilities, telecommunications. So the regulatory environment is quite broad. And there are some regulations, such as GDPR, that apply to all companies that hold personal data. But to your question, Tomomi, there are other incentives on companies. We are increasingly seeing investors are interested in cybersecurity measures, and this is beginning to be reflected, for example, in the credit rating agencies of Moody's and Standard & Poor. Customers are increasingly demanding evidence of cybersecurity, not so much in consumer markets, but definitely in business-to-business markets. And finally, insurance companies are getting much stricter in terms of wanting evidence of good cybersecurity controls. So if you look at that whole range of incentives, regulatory, insurance, customers and investors, then most companies will see that there is some incentive on them to improve their cybersecurity practices.
Jamie, I have a question from the audience. So in the last slide, in the final slide, you mentioned about that cybersecurity is not the matter of that. It's not the matter that managed by IT department. Can you elaborate a little bit what you want to deliver with that message?
So obviously the IT department have a very important role, but it's not only the IT department. So for example, if you are running procurement, then you need to understand any cybersecurity risk that the company may face in its supply chain. For example, if you are running an operation that is handling a lot of sensitive information, then it's going to be for your staff to ensure that information is protected, because only they can understand its importance. They need to make sure they're not emailing it to people outside the company. The IT department can provide the technical controls, but it's for everyone in the company to implement those controls. And as far as the board is concerned, they are the ones who have to make decisions about investment in cybersecurity, what those priorities should be, how those should be balanced against other demands on the company budget. I could go on. HR have an important role to play in terms of training, etc., etc. But it's a whole of company issue. I think my biggest problem often is that it's very hard for the IT department to really understand business risk. So somehow the business risk has to be communicated to the IT department so that they can prioritize controls in the right place.
Thank you, Jamie, for joining today.
Thank you.